It is that joyful little ditty, which means that we are here. It's time for another week of the Rec Poker Podcast. Thank you so much for joining us. I'd like to thank website AMP and the Running Aces Hotel, Racetrack, and Casino for their ongoing support. And I'd like to thank you, the audience, for joining us here for this edition of the Rec Poker Podcast. I'm your host, Jim Reed. And if you want to learn more about me or any of the other members of the Wrecking Crew, you can go to rec.poker/crew, or you can just ask them yourselves. Team, what are your names and where can people find you?
I'm Chris Jones. You can find me on 5x5 on PokerStars and Twitter.
I'm John Somsky. You can find me at Poker Geek MN everywhere.
And I'm Kim Kilroy. I'm Pet Vet here and on most places, but on PokerStars, I'm Fergie56.
Well, thanks for joining me, gang. I have the best job in the world. I love that I get to hang out with y'all every week and talk poker strategy. Just like every week, we're playing in the nightly Rec Poker home game on PokerStars, trying to steal each other's chips and win that beautiful, coveted bronze Rec Poker pin. And just like every week, we're going to take a post from the Rec Poker forums and talk about it here with the group. So, and premium members at Rec Poker are always welcome to come on the show if there's a forum post that you've made, if you're a premium member that you'd like to discuss, or if you see someone else's forum post that you're interested in, you can come on and join the podcast here with us. Go to rec.poker/events. We record on Monday nights. Come join us. So, this is a post by Michael, and it's called Jack Jack on a two-pair board. So I'll just introduce, I'll just kind of read through it. I do encourage everyone, go get a free community account and just go to rec.poker and check out the forums yourself. We'll touch on a number of the subjects that come up, but you really, to see everyone's responses and all the details that people put into it, you'll get more out of it by going and just checking out the forum post itself. So Michael says, on a whim, I decided to play in my first live MTT yesterday in just over a year. I finally reached the table at level 3 with blinds at 100, 200, with 200 big blind average and a 20K starting. My third hand at the table, I'm on the button and get dealt Jack Jack. Okay, so things are looking pretty good for Michael. There were 2 limps in front of me. And again, the blinds are 100, 200 here. So there's 2 limps in front of me, and I opened to 700 and got calls from the big blind and from one of the limpers. Okay, so it's amazing that one of those limpers folded given those pot odds, but all right. So we see a flop of a rainbow 299 where it checks all the way around to Michael, and he bets 1,300. We don't actually know exactly what the pot is here, and I don't do math live on TV. We talked about this already, but checks to me, bets 1,300, the big blind calls, and the third player check raises up to 3,700. Michael's taken a bit aback, but calls and the big blind folds. Michael gets into a bit of what he might have here. He's ranging his opponent. That's exactly the right kind of stuff to be thinking about here. What hands he could have, what he's representing. The turn's an 8, and the player leads out for 4,700, and we call again. And again, we've got Jack Jack, and the board is 2,998. Michael says, I still feel comfortable with the overpair. And to be honest, my mind frame after this call was that if he really does have a 9, then go ahead and milk me for my stack. Otherwise, he seems to be playing quite aggressive. I'm in a good spot to get max value out of him.
I don't think you should give any spoiler alerts. Let's talk about the hand.
Okay, let's talk about the hand. I love that, Kim. Get right into it. So well, yeah.
So the first thing I will say is I would just encourage every potential listener to get this kind of mind frame out of your thinking, which is if they've got a 9, if they've got it, they got it. Let's just get all the chips in, because you started this hand with 100 big blinds. To say, oh, well, I got jacks. If they have a 9, well, here, have my 100 big blinds, I think is not really where we want to start our thinking. We've really got to think about, okay, well, could they have a 9? How likely is it for them to have a 9? If they have a 9, can I fold my jacks? Well, yes, you can. You can fold them quite easily. And so it's not that they automatically have a nine, but I think that to sort of like that kind of, I mean, there are situations like, well, if we had pocket deuces here, and I say, well, or something, they have quad nines or something, and I don't know, like I'm like, oh, good game if you've got quad nines. But I think for the most part, we kind of want to eliminate that kind of thinking to start this off. Is my first thought.
Yeah, I
Um,
completely agree.
Yeah, I think you don't want to you want to let the facts guide you. You don't want to have a thing that you want to do and do that and then find justification for it.
Mm.
um, and then I guess, so looking at this is I mean, it's an interesting hand. So first of all, I think when we're facing limpers, um, and we're at the 100, 200, 200 level. So there's already 500 that's going to be dead money in this pot. We get two limps, so now there's 900 that's going to be dead money in this pot. I want to be, if I'm going to if I have a hand like Jack's after two limps and I want to try to isolate, I'm going to be making this a lot bigger to try to get them out to start. So pre-flop, I think we need to choose a bigger sizing, so that we don't get a ton of callers, so that when it comes deuce 9-9, we can more confidently say there are less of those in our opponent's range. I think there are a lot of deuces and nines in our opponent's range when we have when we have limps and then that we put a small raise over the top. And so I would probably, let me think. We got 500.
Would say go 3.5 plus 1 for each limper
Yep. Yeah.
in this
So
spot.
yeah, I agree. So we probably want something like 1,200, something like that even.
That seems like at least that's putting them to a real decision.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know Kim's got that great formula for how to think about it. So that would be, I think, 11.5 if you wanted to do that. Or sorry, what am I saying? That would be 1, 2, 3.5. This is why we don't do live math. We already talked about this, guys. What was that, 5.5?
Three and a half big blinds would
1,100.
be 350. Yeah.
Yeah, so
Yeah,
1,100.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, and that's what I was thinking. I was
thinking.
thinking 1,200 is what I would probably do with this. So somewhere in that, I mean, like, regardless, it needs to be bigger than this. Like, we want to, at the bare minimum, I mean, hopefully, maybe we just win this, right? And Jax is a hand that's okay to win a small pot with. And if we don't, we want to isolate. We don't want to go multi-way with Jax. So we just need to make this bigger to start. Once we get there and so now we're multi-way on a deuce 9-9 flop that has been limped and we've let people in. And we've got, we're on the button, right? So we have position.
We've got ultimate position. Yeah.
This is a spot that I'm actually considering checking quite frequently, not betting this flop into this multi-way spot. I think I frequently have the best hand. I'm not sure that I accomplish a ton by betting, other than, I'm probably, the best thing that I can do right now is to chase away some overcards. That's probably the justification for betting. And I can probably get rid of people if they've got some aces, kings, or queens. So
I think that a small bet gives us some protection against overcards.
Yeah. And so I can see a small bet here, but this is often a spot that I will consider a check too. But I think either of those options is fine. But because what is really messy about a flop like this is it's a really good board. It's really hard to deal with a check raise on a 9-9 deuce board, especially a one where we haven't isolated as much and we haven't eliminated these hands. Both of our opponents can have a ton of nines, and you know, once we get check raised, this hand gets really dicey really quick.
Yeah, and it's one of those boards, like paired boards like this. There aren't a lot of natural draws. There's not a lot of natural bluffing candidates. So one of the things that it makes them good c-betting candidates, because it's just hard for lots of hands to coordinate with this board. That also means that they're good check raising boards, because if you're playing honestly, you should really only be doing it with very strong hands. And if your opponent is c-betting too much in spots like this, which they probably should be, that's the best way to get them to fold a lot of that stuff with your bluffs. So there's kind of like a leveling war that goes into it. And I think monotone flops are a very similar spot where, as Kim says, you can make a very small bet and leverage the part of their range that you're trying to affect. So if you're trying to get them to fold king queen on a jack high flop, you don't need to bet half pot or 2/3 pot to get that to happen, because the part of their range that you're trying to get to fold is a low equity part of the range. They're going to fold to a small part, and you're just not going to get them to fold a 9. You're not going to get them to fold pocket 10s. You're probably not going to get them to fold like pocket 6s, pocket 7s either. So don't even target that with your bet sizing. Make that small bet, leverage those overcards that you do want to get to fold, and then you're not bloating the pot. When they do have a 9, you have a lot more room later. I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I don't think this is an easy board to check raise. Like, I don't think this is an easy board to raise, especially with 3 players in the hand, unless you have exactly a 9
Right.
or exactly pocket 2s. So other than that, I don't think it's like, even with 10s, you're not that comfortable because you have the big razor. So even if you've called with pocket 10s, they have all the over pairs in their range. So I don't know if this is a great board for, like, as opposed to like 9-8-7 with 2 hearts kind of thing would be
Yeah,
an easier board for the big blind to check raise there.
I would only be check raising here from a frequency point of view, not from a hand strength point of view. So I would just be choosing this as a spot to check raise where my opponent is c-betting a lot. They can't have much on boards like
Okay,
this as well. So
maybe with 2 players, but this has got 3 players in the hand, and I think that makes a huge difference.
That's a good point. That's a great point.
Well, and that's a good point, because we do have an intervening call here. So we bet the big blind flats, and then it gets check raised. And you know, we really do need to, I mean, like, I think we have to consider that there's some, I mean, like, I know we say, well, if they've got a 9, they've got it. But I mean, I think we really have to take that pretty seriously. This is a board that is going to get, because we've got to expect other bets are coming. Our jacks are really vulnerable already.
Yeah, and when that player does make the check raise, the big blind player is still in the hand, as you're pointing out, Chris. And even though we know that the big blind folds to the action, that big blind has a lot of 9s in their range, as played.
It's a perfect spot for a call with a 9 when you're big blind.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that should inform the check raising range of the other player.
Right.
Like, they shouldn't be doing it as just like Kim is saying. You know, you've got more players in the hand. You've got more ranges that could have a 9 in it, among other strong hands. That it's a less attractive area spot to pick for that check raise. So that skews them even more to value. So then they're definitely, so let's just say that this is the kind of player that is check raising their 9s. And are there other value hands that they might have in a check raising range here in a limped pot? Pocket 2s, I guess.
Deuces, yeah.
Yeah.
But it was limped, raised, and then called, right?
Yeah, so deuces would make sense there, especially since we didn't do it very big. I mean, deuces are going to come along and see if they can hit this kind of miracle flop. So they make sense.
I see some people do this with other pairs as well. 6s, 5s, 7s, 8s, like assuming that the person has overcards and their 2 pair is going to be good there.
Yep, I think that makes sense. Okay, so then, where do we want to take this? So as played, we make that bet, we get the check raise, and I think calling in position seems like the right play here. I don't think we can fold given the sizing and the situation. And I don't think 3-betting with a re-raise is good given the range that they have at this point. They're only going to be able to play perfectly against us by folding everything
Yeah.
worse and calling with better.
Cannot raise this. It's better to fold than to raise this right now.
Yeah. So then I think the call is the right way.
I think this is a tough call still, though.
Yeah,
This is a
I
pretty
do
tough
too.
call. Like, I mean, I would be really afraid when the big blind just calls.
Yep.
I would be really afraid because our bet wasn't small. We bet half pot. That's not a
Yep.
small bet.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I agree. I'm actually more scared of the big blind right now than the check raise player if I'm in this spot.
mhm.
And and this is also why I like on this board a multi-way. I like checking this flop because I think I don't have a 3-street hand,
Oh, I love that.
and I am in position. I think I've got the best hand. Yeah, I could, an ace or a king or a queen could come on the turn, but I'm less concerned about that happening than getting into this kind of spot where I'm just,
Hey, Chris, if it
Yeah,
was
and the pot's
multi-way,
getting bloated really quickly, right?
Yep,
The
right.
pot's getting bloated really quickly.
Yeah.
If we had
I mean,
made a really small bet, like 25, 30% pot,
Yep,
and then it had been raised, it's a much easier call.
right. Now it's about a quarter of our stack. If we call this,
right?
about our quarter of our stack of our 100 big blind stack is in the middle. And it's just going to get worse from there.
And when we're behind, we've got 2 outs.
Right. Right.
So I really like Stu's point here in the chat where he says, I wouldn't check raise trips. I don't want the villain to fold. So go for 2 streets. Yeah, I think that, and as we're seeing with the chip stacks, you don't necessarily need to get it in. And who knows what their read is of Michael, who's going to be the player that has the opportunity to make that last bet. So I think that's a good point. So then in that case, so Stu, take your time and please type in the chat whenever it's convenient for you. Would you be check raising with bluffs here? Or would you just not have a check raising range? Or would you check raise with some other hands? While you're thinking about that, we'll keep talking. So as it happens, then the big blind actually folds after we call. So we go to the turn heads up, and the turn is an 8, and the player leads out for 4,700. Any thoughts at that point? Are we calling? Are we like, I don't think I can fold now, given that we called the check raise on the flop. That's a pretty good card for us, or for our, it's a pretty good card for us, really. Are we calling? Are we folding? Again, I don't think raising makes any sense. One note to Michael, if we had some more detail in the hand, this would be helpful. It's not clear what some of the stack sizes are or what some of the pot geometry has resulted in. There's some other
And it's
like,
the 8,
positional
turn
stuff.
8, turn 8 is it a flush card or not? You
Yeah.
don't know that, right?
Yeah. So Michael's done a good job of putting a lot of detail into the post here, but there are some other details that that would be helpful for us to make some of these decisions of where we are in the tournament, some other stuff like that. I know it's still early enough in the tournament, but
Yeah, I made a point of saying the SPR is only 1.5 to 1 right now. Like we're
right.
getting very quickly committed to this pot.
Right.
And one of the things that I think about when people check raise and we call them, right, that when they go ahead and barrel turns after going multi-way check raising and getting called, like some people take that check raise line as their sort of one and done bluff line, right? Like they're sitting there, right, okay. And so I don't think this 8 has probably improved like to a point that's beating us a ton of whatever that check raising range is, unless it's specifically pocket 8s, which might be a good check raise bluff because it's going to block some 9s.
Yeah.
I suppose. So maybe somebody might take their pocket 8s and now have hit their miracle card. But oh boy, When somebody does this, when they barrel after they get their check raise called, it really leans towards value. I mean, there are people who are capable of check raising and then barreling and barreling again, but we're swimming deep into value waters right now.
I think that one of the biggest tells in this hand is that the villain leads for such a small amount on the turn. And I think that this is very common when people don't know what to do, when their bluff raise got called. And then they lead small, which is where if it's a value raise, they're going to always lead big. Always.
I think
Right?
that's a great insight.
So I think that that's one of the biggest tells in this hand was the villain's sizing on the turn. And
Yeah,
for
that
me, the
makes sense.
hardest part of this hand was on the flop. And then once we get to the turn and the villain makes that kind of sizing, the hand just plays out.
So I want to talk about that a little bit, because this is what I was getting at when I talked about like making a frequency based check raise as opposed to a hand strength based check raise. If we had a hand like, so the flop is 2-9-9. If we had a hand like 8-10, that would be a good candidate for a frequency based check raise here. Not because you have a backdoor runner straight draw, but because you're blocking 8-9 and 10-9, which are the most common hands that your opponent's going to have that have a 9 in them. So if you were going to do a one and done check raise, as opposed to the kind of check raise on a flop like 7-8-9 with 2 hearts, where you're actually going to have some equity draws that are going to be part of that range, here I would choose a hand like 8-10, where you're blocking my opponent's 9s, and that would be a good, for me, it feels like that would be a good one and done check raise candidate. When they call, and I turn a pair in this example that we're describing, when the 8 comes, I think it is this spot that Kim's describing where they're like, oh wait, now what? The goal was for them to fold, they didn't. Now I've picked up some equity and I don't really know like how to play comfortably, so they're going to make this like compromise bet. And I think if you can notice that kind of bet sizing tell is really powerful. I think that's exactly what happened here.
Right. I think they get into no man's land here, and they have to either check or they have to bet big. And I think the solver would want them to bet big in this spot. And this bet like just screams like, I don't know what to do now.
Yeah. Andrew Brokus talks often on the Thinking Poker podcast about how people aren't sure whether they should bet or fold. And so they like, or if they should raise or fold. And so they end up compromising with making like a small bet, because it feels like they're kind of solving the problem, but they're not doing anything wrong. And it's just the worst thing you can do. Mostly you should just don't compromise. Just do either this thing that's the best thing or this other thing that is also a really good thing. Don't compromise by calling, and don't compromise by making small bets. Do it for a reason. So I agree with Kim 100%. That feels like that's a spot where just take the small bet out of your range in that particular spot and either check or make a big bet.
That sounds a lot like a t-shirt. Poker players do it for a reason.
royalties on the Rec Poker branding merchandise line. All right, so I think that's all correct, and Kim made the good point that as played, once we get to the turn as it is, I think we're calling given the sizing. And then the river is a 2, and he drops now. So Michael says he drops a massive overbet that he never really counted, and he just collected his remaining 10K and called it. And I think this is another note to Michael, some friendly, constructive criticism is, I know I'm not sure you're being precise enough in your knowledge about the pot at the time that you're playing and the stack sizes at the time that you're playing. Because based on what I understand about the hand so far, I don't think this is a massive overbet. I think it's, a fairly large bet, but
well, he may have put his entire stack in, but it doesn't matter because you only have 10K behind, right? That's the like, it doesn't matter how many chips he's just put in the middle.
Yes,
it's a 10K bet. And that's
Right.
the part that I think is sort of the missing piece.
Yeah, good clarification, Chris. And that and Michael does point that out in there, but it's like that also the stack size is earlier in the hand. Like that's something you should be thinking about when you're considering, am I going to call this check raise? What is the effective stack becomes really relevant to that conversation. So Michael does call, and he says, if he's got the 9, then good game. And if you really did have something like ace 2, then congrats on the 2 outer. And that will be true sometimes, but to Chris's point earlier, that's not really that's not the best way to be thinking about poker, but that is true. So he ends up turning over 10-8. So I had read that earlier. I don't want to claim that prediction, but the fact is, I think that's actually a pretty savvy frequency-based check raise candidate for on the flop. And I would just not, as the villain, I would have played it differently.
Yeah, for sure.
After there. And so it was a good hand for Michael. He picked it up, saw the 10-8, and he says during the break he caught up with me and was curious why I called down with Jack there. And he says I couldn't find a fold on a board where I had an overpair and there were no overcards to my hand, to which he chuckled and admitted he'd probably do the same. And Michael says a fold was basically never an option given the run out, and that the action screamed out as a bluff more than a made hand. And I think we've kind of gotten at some of that, the sizing and the line that they took. Kim?
Right. But I would say that the action doesn't scream out a bluff necessarily. And I think that a lot of the time he's going to lose this hand.
Yeah, for sure. This screams value to me. This line, and you caught a bluff this time, and you might be naming it as like an obvious bluff in retrospect, but I think if you played this hand 100 times and you face this line, you're going to lose your stack more than you're going to win it.
Thanks. Right. That's such a good point. Yeah.
Yeah. Versus 2 opponents here, I think there's often going to be a 9 out there. So.
And we got another comment in the post here from ImLuigi, who we talked about last week in their own forum post. And ImLuigi replies to Michael here and says, with 2 limps, we need to be opening larger than 700. It's important to maximize equity at every spot in the hand, and we're crushing the range of the limpers. Every extra chip we can get them to put into the pot when they are behind helps us win more in the long run. And it also helps you more clearly define their ranges. When they're getting such a good price to call your undersized raise, ranging their hands is much more challenging. They can have many more combos with a 9 and even some combos with a 2. Glad it worked out for you, but I think this should actually be a fold on the river without a live read. So yeah, full points, ImLuigi. I think that's exactly what we've kind of decided here. And exactly as you say, you benefit from, with the larger sizing preflop, you benefit from clearer, more defined ranges. You add more fold equities to just win the pot outright more times. And you're also building the pot with your value hands so that the pot geometry means that it's a bigger pot for you later when you do have a value holding and you get to choose the size of the pot in position. That's all well said there.
Right. I don't think it's a fold on the river though, personally. When he calls the turn, I don't think he can fold for that price on the river.
Oh yeah, the sizing.
Only a half pot bet. It's a half pot bet. So he only has to be right 25% of the time or something like that.
Yeah, I was thinking about this. I don't know that do you think we're gonna, I mean, this is a pure bluff catcher now.
Yes, it's a bluff catcher.
There's no value that we beat.
Right. It's a bluff catcher.
Do you think that people bluff this way? Check raise, barrel turn, shove river.
The only tell in there to me is the small turn.
Small sizing. Okay. Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
Let's see if our friend Jonathan Little has anything to add on that subject, and then we'll come right back and wrap this baby up.
Have you ever wondered whether you should call a preflop raise or 3-bet instead?
All the time.
What do you do when you have a flush draw? Do you raise it or do you just call? What do you do with ace-king when you miss the flop? Are you tired of guessing about what the right play is with your particular hand? Well, my name is Jonathan Little, and I am a 2-time World Poker Tour champion and creator of PokerCoaching.com, where we offer over 1,000 interactive hand quizzes where you play a hand and then get real-time feedback from our world-class pros. Don't guess and don't stress. Just register for your free account at pokercoaching.com/recpoker right now.
There you go, folks. WSOP 2021 is coming up. There's a Rec Poker House down in Vegas. There's trips planned. There's people to hang out with. There's tournaments to study for. Go to pokercoaching.com, enter code RecPoker, and get ahead. Yeah,
There's borders to open.
There's borders to open for some of us Canadian players. That's right. We cannot wait. We cannot wait.
So back to this sort of, he turns his jacks into a bluff catcher to me on the turn. Well, even on the flop, when he decides to call the flop, and then he's either going to be ahead or behind when all of those cards come in. They don't make any difference. So when he calls the turn barrel, the small turn barrel, he has to call the river too. Like, it's just a nothing card. So he has to do call. So to me, the hardest point in this whole hand was on the flop.
Yeah, I agree with that. But I think I'm still probably folding this river. I mean, I hear what you're saying and the odds are, but I need to know something that my opponent.
Then why wouldn't you fold the turn here?
Well, I mean,
I'm just saying when he decides to call the turn.
We're giving me only I've just arrived at this river and I've played.
Right.
I don't think I'm playing this way, but I think if
Chris,
I did, I'm probably folding.
I agree with you 100%. I'm just saying, if you called the turn, then you have to call the river.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah, and Chris would have raised over the Limpers larger pre-flop, so there would have been a different dynamic. We would have had a different pot size, and like that's another thing here. Like honestly, we got to be thinking about the river bet when we are raising over Limpers pre-flop. Okay, we got to be thinking, what is our hand right now? Does our hand benefit from a low SPR or a high SPR? And before we even think, okay, how many people are in the hand? Like, you got to think about sizing, stack sizing, bet sizing, raise sizing, pot geometry. Pot geometry is not just a clever name for installation art that I build in the dish rack of my kitchen. Pot geometry is a really important function, and the sizing that you choose pre-flop has these knock-on effects later in the hand. And I think you would have had a very different turn decision if you had made a bigger raise pre-flop, because the pot would be bigger. That turn sizing would have been different, and that might have given you an opportunity to make a different decision in this hand.
And he may have very well gotten 2 folds pre-flop.
Right.
With a
8-10 offsuit, right? Or whatever the guy had.
Right.
Yeah, he's not calling. Right. I see your face, Chris. I'm like, hello.
So what I want to know is when he decides to call the raise on the flop. Why doesn't he just jam instead? Like if he thinks he doesn't have a 9 and he's beating all aces, ace X, then why doesn't he just jam the flop? To me, this would be a better way to play this, to put it back into your opponent's.
So Kim,
hands. Like obviously you're always getting called if they have a 9, but if you're going to call down to the river and lose your chips anyways, now you're giving them a chance of hitting their ace or their king or whatever they have.
I think that's a great tension. And I think and I wish I knew the answer to that, man. Like, I think when it's me, I always think about like, what are the errors that this opponent is more likely to make? Or is this opponent more likely to make a calling error or a betting error? And if it's a calling error, then yeah, this is the spot to get it in. But if we feel like this is the opponent that is going to barrel off too wide, then I'd rather be letting them make that error instead.
Right.
I'm not sure we know enough about them, but that's how my brain looks.
I agree. I just find this is a really tough spot in tournaments. You get in there, you have 100 blinds, you think you have all these chips to play with, and then all of a sudden you're bloated in this pot. You're and like your whole chip stack's coming into play.
Yeah.
And it's like really tough spots.
And Stu said something earlier that I didn't get a chance to repeat into the group, but Stu put this in the chat. He said it comes down to a bad fold is better than a bad call. And particularly in tournament poker, it's true because the chips that you lose are worth more than the chips that you win. And, it's just, yeah, it's a different dynamic. It's a different dynamic in those in that situation. Okay, well, any other thoughts on this?
No, good tough spot though. I like these ones because we
Yeah.
all get ourselves into these tough spots, and we suddenly look at a pot that's blown way out of proportion, and suddenly half our chips are in there, and it's like, now what?
Yeah, that's right. How did that happen? Yeah, and I think as Chris says as well, like you always do just have the opportunity to fold, even though you might feel like, given the odds, you're like you have to call or you owe it to some formula to defend at a particular frequency or something. That's all true, and that's all well and good, but you still always have the chance to just listen to your nose and listen to your gut and make a fold if you think it's the right play.
Especially with over pairs, I think just getting this out of your lexicon of like, well, if they got it, they got it. I mean, I think that we can fold over pairs, right? And there are times to do it and there are times not to do it. And differentiating between that is really the art of this game, I think.
And one really important feature about over pairs is that they're a one pair hand.
Mm-hmm.
So if anyone has Poker Tracker at 4, go filter for one pair hands in your database and see how you're doing. See how you're doing lifetime when you go to showdown with one pair. You will be surprised how good a hand one pair really is. And yeah, an over pair is better than top pair, and top pair with a top kicker is better than medium pair. But one pair hands are not huge chip winners in the grand scheme of things. People lose a lot with one pair. They win a lot with one pair. You trade chips around with one pair hands. So it's not a spot where you're like, I can't wait to get every chip into the pot because I have an overpair. Often. Yeah, thanks, Kim. I know I'm the same way. Take it.
But this was a 2-pair hand.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, that's right.
It's
a 2-pair. All right. Well, we're not going to top that. We got to go out on a high note with that. Is there anything else that we should talk about? Because that feels like the perfect way to sum it up. All right. Well, I want to thank website AMP and Running Aces Hotel, Racetrack, and Casino. ImLuigi and Michael, Kim, John, and Chris, and of course the big dog Steve Friendland and all our listeners. See you again soon. Thanks, everybody.